Okay, so neurons, right? Neurons are remarkable. They come in a remarkable number of shapes and sizes. This right here is an illustration of sort of a classical neuron, right? That we learned about, in intro classes where you've got a cell body or soma, also called the perikaryon, which means around the nucleus. It's the site of the nucleus, which contains genetic material, including all of the chromosomes, all of the genes that code for the various protein constituents of this structure. It has these projections off of it, these branch-like projections, which are called dendrites, which are the site of input from other neurons, which form connections, chemical connections, right, across synapses or gaps, where the electrical message from the first neuron is converted into the release of a chemical neurotransmitter, which then binds to receptors that are located on the dendrites of the postsynaptic cell. This is the sort of receipt site. The number of dendrites tells you something about how much information is being integrated, right, by a particular neuron. And then, typically there's a bulge at the beginning of the axon, this longer wire, which extends away, from the cell body and carries information in the form of electricity out to other neurons. And, these neurons sort of form networks. But of course, we talk about, how diverse neuron shape and size actually happens to be. This is sort of the classical neuron that you see in introductory textbooks, but you've got, neurons that look more like this with pyramidal shaped bodies. We're going to see these are really quite important in the neocortex, for example. And, one way of sort of classifying or describing different forms of neurons is by counting the number of projections or poles that come off of them, right? So you actually have neurons that are called unipolar, which means they have only one pole or one projection. And these are actually quite common neurons in your sensory system. So the sensory neurons that carry information from the body, they project in, through the dorsal roots of spinal nerves. You've got 31 pairs of spinal nerves up and down. They're symmetric. There's one on the left and one on the right. The dorsal or back portion has an actual ganglion attached to it, and that ganglion is filled with cell bodies of neurons and of sensory neurons that are carrying that information from the periphery of the body into the central nervous system. And those particular cell bodies have a single or unipole that projects off, but that pole that projects off then splits into two projections. One of them actually is coming from the body in towards the dorsal root, of the spinal nerve, right? And the other one, meets that single pole off the cell body and, basically projects inward into the central nervous system, carrying that information. So it kind of is like a T. So here's your cell body of the unipolar neuron, right? That's sensory neuron that's located in your dorsal root ganglion. Here's the single pole that projects off of it. Here's the projection that's coming from the body, and it just passes this pole and goes into your central nervous system and ascends your spinal cord and carries information about what's happening in your body in terms of sensation. So this is a unipolar cell, but it has this sort of branching of two projections off the unipole. So sometimes it's called a pseudo bipolar or pseudo unipolar cell because it's kind of pseudo unipolar. It has a single projection, but then it splits. We also talk about neurons that are bipolar, right? That have literally, one projection here and then another projection here off of the cell body. And a pretty classical example of where you find bipolar cells, right, is the retina, where the photoreceptors that are located at the, back of the retina actually project forward. They make synaptic connections, right, with the bipolar cell, with one of the poles in a bipolar cell. The second pole projects to the ganglion cell, and the ganglion cell axons leave the, the eye as the optic nerve and work their way back towards the lateral geniculate and, the rest of the central nervous system. So bipolar cells are also found in the nervous system, and the retina is a good example of where you would find them. And then the majority of neurons actually have these multipoles, many poles, many projections off of them, right? So they're called multipolar cells, and that is the bulk of the 100 billion neurons you have when you're about 18 or 19 years old.